You listen to BBC Radio 6 Music. This is Tom Robinson. That's Check the Meaning by Richard Ashcroft from the 2002 album Human Conditions, which was one of the seminal tracks with which we launched the station back when we started in 2002. We just played the bejesus out of that.
Thank you very much.
Love that track, love that album.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for having me, Tom.
Lovely
Pleasure.
to have you here. Now, first that I knew that there was new Richard Ashcroft on the way was back in February last year at the Music Producers Guild.
That's right, yeah.
I saw you get up with Youth's all-star band and absolutely slay the audience. I actually wrote down what I said on air at the time. I saw Richard Ashcroft give an absolutely stunning performance fronting an all-star band. I've seen some charismatic stage performers in my time, but he was the real deal and one of the very finest I've ever seen. It was an amazing performance.
Oh, thank you so much. I'd not performed for a while, really, and I think, this whole thing of shaving the head off, feeling fresh, feeling invigorated, and also wanting to, with the all-star band, it's a bit like, hey, you better rise to the occasion as well, and wanting to, say to the guy, this is what, if there was any ever fuss about me in the past, this is what it was about. And I think the guys got it in the rehearsal, actually. So I drove down to the rehearsal for that show with the full intent of going through Bittersweet with them. They suggested the drugs don't work, but absolutely blowing their minds. And I think I achieved that. I think anyone who was in that rehearsal room when I came down that day felt that energy. So, yeah, thanks for the compliment. And it was good to do that for Youth as well, because I've got a great respect for Youth, and he's a top man. And it was great to see him appreciated like that by the producers, because he's had a fantastic career, and he will do in the future. And he's a great musician, and he does have an amazing amount of contacts, I must admit. And it was a great band. And, to think of singing the Bittersweet with a Sex Pistol on drums.
Yeah, I mean
that's just like a dream for me. So you want to live up to that. Of course, I've not been making what would be seen as a punk or this, that, and the other. But I think that attitude and the essence of punk for me is the essence of rock and roll. It's the essence of hip hop. It's that independent, free spirit, prepared to go against the tide, prepared to release music that maybe too long to maybe people don't quite understand, that's out of time, not always following someone else's blueprint. Because when you're doing that, when you're chasing someone else's sound, that's not being creative. No. You are just in...
And it's easy to do these days.
Yeah, it's much easier to do now than it was anyway. I mean, you can almost press a button and say, and ask for a style before you even started. Computer, will start building a style of music.
The other thing I think it's worth saying is that for both yourself and Paul Cook on drums, you wouldn't have to know the previous reputation of either of you. If somebody stone cold had walked into the room and witnessed that performance, they'd have seen something in 2016 that was, that's a great drummer, that's a great performer. Yeah. So it's important, I think, that artists with a certain reputation also invent themselves fresh every year and give the performance fresh minted each time.
For me, I was fortunate that, I had a few years where my decision, I think, through circumstances, I hadn't been touring a lot, I hadn't been recording. So, that gives me a unique ability to be on there because I want to be there. We've all got to bring the bacon on, for want of a better expression, at some point in life. And you'll find a lot of creative people are suddenly put in a position where they're having to live the Groundhog Day experience.
I've been there and done that.
Yeah, all musicians have been there. And as that's happening, you're thinking, well, this is a contradiction in terms they're paying money for me, who they believe to have some kind of authenticity. That performance carries a weight because I have to transcend myself and reach these moments, just like almost in the same way I imagine some method actor from the 70s was drained after he had been on, because every last part of his fibre was put into that performance. And once you start compromising that with either the repetition or your production levels have reached a level where you're now jumping at the same point on stage as you were 7 cities ago because the guy wants to press the confetti.
Yeah.
You've already lost that element that potentially music drew you in the first place, or expression. It's about smashing this. So it's a very fortunate position to be in that I made the decision, I've got a family, I've been doing that for X amount of years, so the hunger to be real and the performance to have energy and vitality rather than just repetition, that's a great position to be in. Obviously we got great examples in Bowie and people who just had that ability to, one, want to reach musically for the stars and fuse all these different things that generally people would say, no, you can't put funk with this, no, you shouldn't, you know.
We should talk about how you implemented that on the new album, because only 3 months later, out comes this record that goes straight to number 3 in the charts.
Yeah.
From his album These People that came out last May, that's Richard Ashcroft, and This Is How It Feels, which is the first taster we got from the new material. And it's just classic Ashcroft, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the album was in the process for a few years, and songs like Out of My Body, the opener, and etc. are hints to where I still really want to travel with this amazing fusion of all the stuff I enjoy.
Where did you record it?
A majority of it was recorded in my cellar, and then there was a couple of studios around London that I used. But essentially, the main ingredients started in the cellar.
That must help.
Yeah, I mean, it's the good thing about anyone knows now that, you know, making music, you know, back in the day there used to be this kind of like sand money pit. You know, you would look at the clock at whatever time and think, wow, you know, that's cost us $1,000 and we haven't even tuned the thing yet, you know.
Yeah.
So those days are over in a way, and in some ways it's sad because there is a studio craft in a way that you learn. Luckily, I had one foot in analog world, you know, very early 90s in studios prior to Pro Tools and everything. Obviously, stuff was still on tape, and you learned that process. And when Pro Tools first came around the Urban Hymns period, we had 2 Pro Tools units running and 2 tape machines. And it was this perfect moment in recording time for me personally, where the new stuff could be harnessed in ways that would have taken hours, days to do. You know, let's flip that guitar over, bang, put it there, da-da-da-da-da. But still the analog essence of songwriting and how these songs were formed was very much in the old school camp. So I think there's a lot of stuff I learned from making records that I wanted to bring back on this record and not completely throw away. I still wanted to make that architecture grand when it needed to be. I still wanted to hear Will Malone strings flowing rather than, you know, okay, I'll mock Will Malone up on this record.
It's lovely to hear Will Malone involved again.
Yeah, it's great to work with. You know, a lot of people almost feel like I've always working with Will. It's just that you hear some of the older, you know, like Lucky Man's and stuff will be played forever, and so will Bittersweet, and Will's on there. I always say to Will, it's like a churning sea. There's an English elegance to what he does as well, which I like. He brings a European, rather than a pure soul string vibe, it actually brings more of a Elgar-y sort of English element to the songs, and that's what worked with Lucky Man and songs in the past. They were songs that you could say, yeah, come from the roots from America, essentially, and from folk, maybe from Ireland, who knows, but rather than American strings arrangements being put over them, Will brings a very English elegance and a deep churning sea to the cellos and the basses. So to have that with my voice again, yeah, it was a great feeling.
So we're going to talk a bit more about that record and the whole process of making it later on, but I thought it'd be nice to ask you about some of your influences and the music that has had the same resonance for you that your music appears to have had for your core audience.
Sure.
And the first track you've actually come up with is Massive Attack.
This is no world-breaking news for anyone out there. You know, most of us out there who like music have heard this song, love this song. And I think what it did for me at the time was we just signed to Virgin Records at the time, and I think Massive Attack were on a label called Circa that was something to do with Virgin. And seeing something so perfectly crystallized at a time when I was in a kind of psychedelic jam band, and it kind of gave me that hunger as well, that one day I'm going to crystallize my influences. I'm going to put them into a vessel that can be consumed. This thing can be consumed by the masses. It can be enjoyed by the music heads. And there's something about this track that achieves this. It achieves that universal appeal, you know, where it's soul, it's hip-hop, yet the masses can enjoy it. I think Will Malone, again, is on the strings on this, which, again, opened me up to Will Malone. So he then did History on Northern Soul with me. And also just things like the piano at the end influenced the way I can only play piano in a chopstick. See, I play with 6 fingers. And the piano, the way it's played at the end of this track, is one of the most influential pieces of piano for me because
Isn't it great? Yeah, and the fact that it just comes at the end.
Yeah.
That rather than make a whole record out of it, they just save it up and then drop it in there.
Exactly, yeah. And the video, of course, you know, people would go on to say, I said that to the director of the Bittersweet video, hey, are we just doing
Walking down the street.
Are we just doing the Massive Attack video here with violence, you know what I mean? What's going on here? But there's something about bands like Massive Attack, and they make the city they're from proud of them.
Yeah.
And then they make the country that they're from proud of them. This is what's so incredible about this island. The innovation that's gone on sonically over the last 50 years is just absolutely phenomenal and deserves like
long may it continue.
Yeah, and long may it continue. But I think these guys have been pivotal over the last 20 years, pushing the boundaries and what can popular music sound like and where can it go.
Let's take a listen after this. Doesn't matter how many times you hear it, Unfinished Sympathy by Massive Attack from Blue Lines just still hits the spot, the sweet spot, the emotional sweet spot, every single time, all these years later.
That's right. And that's when you've been lucky enough, like they are, obviously, to have hit on a timeless theme. That's the beauty of it. We don't outgrow things that are timeless. They only get deeper and richer and more, you know, more emotional. That's the beauty, isn't it, about music, is that someone who bought Revolver when it came out, what value for money? Because
yes,
because they're still finding, you should be, because whatever that magic is, it's timeless, and we don't outgrow timelessness. We only get deeper and deeper into it, like Shakespeare or whatever it is. You know, it has that depth, and I think that's just a great thing, you know.
I did buy that as a I was 16 when it came out.
Yeah.
And, you know, Good Day Sunshine just kind of, it just summed it all up.
But this morning you could have put that, if you still had that very vinyl, you could have put Good Day Sunshine on this beautiful summer's day in London, and it would have resonated just like it did then, if not more.
Totally so.
Yeah.
So now you sprung a bit of a surprise on us with the second one, though.
Because this song was so pivotal for us when we were a lot younger. When we first discovered this album, we were just Aphrodite's Child 666. We were absolutely crazy for it. The Four Horsemen is probably one of the greatest outros, guitar outros of all time. And I remember playing this to John Leckie, the producer, and I asked him, because he didn't know the tune, what year did he think it was produced? And he couldn't put a year on it, because it sounds so big. It sounds so well produced that it's difficult. It's got all that 70s warmth.
It came out of Greece, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you've got Vangelis and Dennis Roussos in a band together, you know, and that's an incredible combination. And these guys went away to some farm or something and took loads of substances and came up with this insane record that's very eclectic. But what strikes you about the Four Horsemen is it just stands out on the record as, you know, I really dislike a lot of guitar indulgence in a way, but sometimes you make an exception. You know, you make it for Hendrix, you make it for these kind of people, and this is one of those songs where it's okay, you can play that outro forever. It's a kind of outro that Scorsese or someone needs to use in a movie. It's just incredible. So, yeah, it was a surprise. I didn't expect the album, when someone first played it, to have anything like this on. But what it became like a test. You know, could you lie in between the speakers at 3 a.m? And could you withstand this? You know what I mean? Can you take it? You know, so here we go. Can you take the Four Horsemen?
From 1972, Aphrodite's Child, featuring both Dennis Roussos and Vangelis, the Four Horsemen.
Yeah.
Picked for us by Richard Ashcroft. What year did you first hear that?
This would be around 1990, probably, late 80s, 90.
So what was your life like back then?
It was then, yeah, again, I was just dreaming of being in a band. I don't think we were signed yet. But what was happening was there was this incredible firestorm, really, where you'd had dance culture had exploded to a point where it was influencing all kinds of different people, whether it be, you know, the Roses, and the way, you know, you go to an early Stone Roses concert and the whole build-up and feeling was that sense of you were in a kind of rave or something was going on. But at the same time that the Stone Roses' first album came out, luckily, we were kind of doing a degree in music. We didn't realize it, but we were massively into sort of like the Byrds, West Coast psychedelia, anything we could get our hands on, really. And what happened was, amazingly, it was almost like our older brothers at the time, whether it be the Happy Mondays and the Primal Scream, and they kind of, again, distilled all this. So not only did we have the old records to listen to, we had the contemporaries who'd kind of taken it for the modern world a new and fresh way.
What was your life like, though? I mean, from day to day, how were you living?
I think after I went to college for a while, but again, that was like I was living at a friend's house at the time, and it was a case of, you know, I'd go into registration, and then I'd worked out certain albums that as soon as I'd registered, I could walk back to my friend's house, whose dad was a great guy who at the time wasn't working, and then we'd probably watch Scarface or something and, you know, listen to some music. And it was a very, even though a lot of things were being created in my mind, you could say, wow, that guy's going nowhere. He has no future, this dude. He's a dreamer. He's never going to get it together. He walks in, he registers, he walks back, he sits with a dude all day chatting about watching Scarface. So, but they were lucky, they were formative years, and what was happening was actually my mind, along with my fellow band members and our friends, was being absolutely saturated by all this stuff, to the point where it was almost a few years after that, there was a period of having to almost stop this
madness.
Yeah, because the older you get, music almost like cuts you even deeper sometimes. So you have to almost like say, "Whoa, I actually can't even listen to that piece right now." Whereas with the young, you kind of there's a sort of naivety. You can hear the most painful music in the world and just kind of absorb it.
But for anyone who's survived the record industry and everything that it throws at a creative person in the course of like a 27-year career, you know, the tabloid nonsense, the rip-offs, the kind of the invasion, all the rest of it. Anybody who's managed to stay on an even keel through that length of time and come through still creating new music must have seen some devastation and also people dropping by the wayside along the way.
Of course, yeah, without a doubt. You have to be cut from a certain kind of cloth to be able to go through this game. And there are tremendous disappointments, and there are people who've been maybe the nihilistic element of the industry. They've been lost due to that, due to signing up on the line there, you know. So we got a problem, and it's more in this country than others. You see, in America, they've got so much stuff to write about. They don't bother putting page-out ads on stuff they don't like. You know, it doesn't make business sense to them. Yeah. And we've kind of, in England, we just never really, the light bulb never came on what the music business actually is. So we are very good at, like, chopping people down, as we know, in mid-career or in, you know, completely misunderstanding where they're coming from.
Tall poppy syndrome.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, you know, but again, that a lot of these things are good things to go through, even though they may be painful. They just, the human condition, that innately selfish sort of jealousy, all that stuff is there. There's no hiding from it. This isn't a utopia. That kind of a dream doesn't exist for me, because if you've been in this game for over 20 years, then you know what kind of like parasites and vipers and what have you are lurking around the corner.
Yes, you do.
And that's where family comes in. My beautiful wife, it's like my family. And I was lucky, I married very early. I married before I was kind of famous. You know, that again is very lucky. A lot of people go through the process of becoming kind of famous, well known, and then they enter a relationship. Then they're never quite sure whether, you know, and all that crap. So I've had an advantage. So I do know that really creative people come with baggage, of course, and that's why, you know, some of the big bands who manage to remain together and tour consistently making it, I'm like, wow, how do you do that? How have you remained like that? What kind of business do you have for psychiatrists on tour with you? What do you do?
Which brings us neatly on to your third choice, which is a band that has managed to survive through that time.
Yeah.
And as a titanic figure, Bobby Gillespie and Primal Scream. After this. I'm afraid a shameful admission here on Six Music with me, Tom Robinson. Richard Ashcroft has just introduced me to a song that I've never heard before, and it's brilliant.
Yeah, it's a classic. For me, you know, at the time it was so, because we loved the Orbs album with little Fluffy Clouds on it. I was just saying then as it was playing that, you know, that became a soundtrack for us. And I think Alex did the mix of this, but the overall record itself, it's that sort of striving, having the freedom, striving for something exceptional, striving for something different, being open. They could have done 10 songs of, say, Damaged. They could have done 10 Stonesy, ballady. They could have done Moving On Up, but instead, you know, there was just seemed to be a freedom in the way they were looking at music, and the influence of Andy Weatherall, and allowing people to go and experiment with the stuff. That openness with their music, and Bobby's got that, getting a different singer to singer one of the songs off the record, him not taking the lead on everything, having instrumentals. There's so many components to make it such a fresh record, but along with the Stone Roses album, I do think this is right up there for that time. Screamadelica is a classic for me. It never fails to find something uplifting in it. I can remember dancing on a roof to this, higher than the sun, someone's roof, some summer's day, probably myself higher than the sun in my mind, and thinking, yeah, you've hit that spot where culture and everything all combines, and it's like perfect timing for us. Just a few years younger than them, just starting our creative journey. This was a blueprint of creative adventure, yet wrapped in an overall thing that people can accept just for what it is. You don't have to be an avant-garde jazz head to get it, but within it, there is jazz, there is soul, there is blues, there's everything in this record.
Well, let's fast forward back across the decades now, from those kind of drug-riddled early excesses and the days of kind of living from day to day, from hand to mouth and everything, back to the present day, because it's equally interesting, I think, for listeners to know how life is now. You're still a young man in your early 40s, and you're managing to square the circle insofar as you have a satisfying home life, you have emotional stability, and yet you're still managing to do sell-out tours, touring the globe, number 3 album, and turning out great work.
Yeah, well, that's a great, if I could wear that as a t-shirt, that would be great. But yeah, like anyone knows, family life is family life, and that's like a full-time thing anyway, with all its peaks and troughs and emotional things, and kids going through certain ages and teenagerdom and all that. So this is just real life. But yeah, I think that my kids now getting to a certain age where, I can look forward now to almost getting back to the sort of time freedoms and things that I never wanted to be a guy who said, okay, see your family, I'm off now because I knew that just doesn't work anyway. It's not something I want, and I've seen many relationships over the years obviously fizzle out or become very difficult as one part of the relationship comes back as an alien and the other person's got everything in order, and then they wreck everything, and all that. So it does have a toll on people. So I think when I first had a family, I got a lot of heat from people in England, from press and stuff, constantly asking me about this, almost as if they weren't ready to have kids. Because a lot of journalists, they vicariously live through their lead singers and that's just the way rock and roll's been. So if you suddenly go against their idea of what you should be doing, a lot of people would have been happy to have been found dead in a hotel room because I'm fulfilling that cliche blueprint. And
I think Keith Richards has managed to kind of defy those sort of expectations as well, hasn't he?
He has, but in the same time, not his fault, but there has been a nihilistic blueprint, a glamorized version of what it is to be a rock and roller or a musician from this side of the tracks, that many hundreds of people have probably died because of that. Well, so this self-perpetuating myth that, I had first-hand knowledge of, because suddenly when I'm making much more of it seems, decisions that could stabilize me as a human being and my life and my creativity and everything, people don't want that. Because the nihilistic thing has been so forced down people's heads that anything other than that is seen as, oh, is that a loss of creativity? I'm telling you now, being in a studio in your cellar with a lot of ideas, with your family up above doing their thing, is equally as creative and gives you as many options as it does being out of your mind, barely able to press down a guitar string. Do you know what I mean? But we've been sold for years a different journey. Yeah, it is interesting that, but I think that comes full circle. You have to wait a long time before, people realise, actually, Johnny Cash, his wife, but it all fits now.
Yes.
He couldn't have been without June, he'd have been this, and he needed that. And everyone respects that. When the guy gets to 60, everyone's 65, everyone's like, oh, family, Johnny, religion, Johnny, God, family, solidity, support, creativity. It's all one thing. It all makes sense. You see the video for Hurt and it breaks your heart. Beyond the cliche, there is another space, an individual space that you've carved for yourself, and along the way you're going to find negativity along the way because, again, you're not performing too cliche. As a northern guy, I've had that all my life. From my first interviews, I've seen words changed into Northern, what they consider slang. So they'll misspell the word in order to give my accent more of a, what they consider a Northern tinge.
If that,
you know what I mean?
Print journalism is always a dodgy thing because it's not here. Yeah. Listeners can hear what you're saying and the tone of voice you're saying it in.
But for years I was called Mad Richard. So everybody's waving placards around everywhere about rights and how they've been mistreated in their area. You know, so I can look back and say, okay, I was a white Northern sort of working lower middle class guy who in print had the way he talked changed. When he made decisions that were going to stabilise his life, create a family, this, that and the other, he got an incredible amount of criticism for that. So you start seeing this pattern, you think, hey, what's the agenda here?
And they even make stuff up.
Yeah, what's the agenda? What do you want? It's like John Lennon, he disliked that line of Neil Young's better to burn out and fade away, that essentially Kurt Cobain used in his suicide note. And Lennon was like, that's just like, that message from a multi-million-pound rock star, it's not where it's at.
As an example of the way that you've managed to still keep songs that have an edge, still have a relevance and haven't softened up in any way, there's a song title that leaps out at me from the current album, which is Everybody Needs Someone to Hurt. Could you tell us about this song just before we hear it?
Yeah, I just think that when we were first getting into sort of West Coast music and that period where from the Summer of Love and a few years and etc., I used to look back with a kind of rose tint glasses and, oh man, those days must have been fantastic. Love to have been there. There was this freedom, there was this, that, there was this, the other. And that utopian ideology was being born out of that period where perhaps with this, or if you take this or think this, then we can solve the world's problems. And that's kind of crept on and on and on. People have this misguided belief, and I think with this tune, it was almost like, actually, no, let's look at it in reality. It seems that we all find someone to inflict some kind of pain on, whether it's through our own insecurity, it's a defense mechanism, whatever it is. Someone say it's some Darwinian thing instilled in us. We're still very tribal. We're barely out of the cave. Who knows? But it felt like there was so much division about to come up, so much divide and conquer in the world, because I've been interested in certain aspects of geopolitics over the last 5-10 years. I've seen how things have been going, and for me, we were coming, which we are now in, a deep period of divide and conquer where people would have lines drawn right down through a family maybe, and that happened in America, it's going to happen in Europe. And for me, that's just another form of programming. It's another form of people, black and white, choice making over stuff that they have not been truly informed about. So you see, what happens after that is when I was projecting ahead with this record, I'm looking at like social unrest, and the only thing that comes after that, unfortunately, is someone to bring in order. And that's what we've been living through, years of events, which then, unfortunately for us, seem to take even further and further our rights away, whether it be privacy or anything else, but also divides us and makes us more and more tribal against each other. So music was always, in my mind, the one thing beyond sport, beyond any other form of entertainment, that smashes all those things, and it still is. And I've noticed that from playing across the world, that one day I can be in Tokyo, 5 days later, the same song, I'm in South America with a completely different culture, and it's still resonating. So that means to say that music still has that immense power of crossing tribalistic country ideologies, the whole lot. And a lot of the time, this stuff has been instilled by other people that do not have your best interest at heart. You know, the idea of separating us from each other and us not recognizing our own common shared humanity is the way that you then impose a kind of much more stricter version of, okay, well, if you guys are fighting amongst yourselves to such this extent, then we're going to have to impose a new set of guidelines. And then all of a sudden there won't be this idea of democracy. There won't be this idea of that. There'll be one party. There'll be one governance. You know what I mean?
Well, let's hope those days are still some way off. Here is the track. You're listening to BBC Radio 6 Music. It's the Tom Robinson Show. My guest is Richard Ashcroft, and from his album These People, that's Everybody Needs Someone to Hurt. sort of rather dark inversion of the usual. Everybody needs somebody to love. Richard, it's been a total pleasure catching up with you.
Thank you so much, Tom. It's been a pleasure for me as well.
How much longer are you going to be on the road this year before you can finally get back to home and that other life?
I know we've got some great dates coming up in the UK that I'm really looking forward to, because places like Glasgow, last year I just did a pretty small but incredible vibe show there. This time I'm moving it up to the arena, same in Leeds, Birmingham. So I've got those shows coming up, and then I've got a great show in Manchester, Castlefield. I've got Black Grape, Sean Ryder. So going back to my, the idea that Sean's going to be playing with us, it's fantastic and amazing. In Manchester, we got Lee Scratch Perry, great DJs, and then myself. So I think at the end of summer, I'm going to be going in the summer months recording and getting the next record ready, because I think we're at that period where, for me personally, I don't want to see 2-3 years or pass before the next record. It's too important now for me just to
strike while the iron's hot.
Yeah, and enjoy and get going. And I've realised that there still are great possibilities there, and I also got a big audience around the world of varying age groups hungry for more material. So why not? It
must be kind of hard to process the amount that these songs seem to mean to individual people. I mean, some people, I hear of people who've been playing your songs at their weddings, at their funerals, and things like that.
Yeah.
They seem to have a deep resonance.
Yeah, you can't truly take that on, but it just reinforces the power of music, that it's, I've said it a million times before, but it's the most powerful art form in the world. I'm very lucky to have scrape the surface of it, but there's so much more to do. And for me, I'm just thankful for all the people before us, all the brothers and sisters, the greats that laid the way. They're the ones we thank, the people before who've kept the spirit, and the ones now who are keeping the spirit alive. So it'll never die. Sometimes the corporate world takes what is the alternative and it swallows it up, and suddenly you get someone on the fringes is a huge star. That sort of happened to me for a while.
It's the work that matters, though.
In the end, it distills down to the songs, and that's what I'll be left with, I suppose, when I'm older. If I look back, it's really the songs and a few memories from concerts of that feeling, that transcendent feeling that I always wanted as a performer, and I want my fans to feel, is that we went somewhere, it was worth it, it was different, it was unique, it was human, and I think that's really important to say. It's human. We're at that crossroads right now where, who knows, in a few years' time we might be all watching avatars of someone, some kind of, who knows what we'll be watching and consuming, or what the next generations will see as creativity and art, and how much the human will be part of that. But right now we're right in the thick of it. It's time to enjoy the madness instead of being drowned by it. Let's embrace it. Let's come together. Let's have some good times, some good concerts. Let's make some good records and just get on with our lives and not hurt anyone.
We began with the human condition. Let's continue with it.
Thank you.
Who put those black lines?
From his current album, These People, top 3 last year. And he's, as he told us, coming back to play these enormous gigs coming up the week after next. The 17th of April, Monday week, Newcastle. Tuesday, the 18th of April, Glasgow. Birmingham Barclaycard Arena on the 20th of April. And Leeds First Direct Arena on Saturday, the 22nd of April. Many thanks to Richard for that fascinating and illuminating interview there.